Welcome to the Interdisciplinary Collaborative Workshops Public Scholarship and Teaching Fall Series. My name is Melinda Lindquist, and I'm an Associate Professor of History at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. I'm one of the ICW co-organizers, along with Ron Amanzadi and Haider Chun, and I'm excited to welcome you to our 5th fall workshop, Applying to Graduate School, Advice about Navigating the Process. Before I introduce today's event and our distinguished panelists, I want to invite you to join us for our final fall workshop on Friday, November 13th, Stories and Voices from Activists in Atlanta, Minneapolis, and Washington, D.C., an Intergenerational Dialogue. Please find our complete fall lineup on our Google site. All of our workshops are recorded and available for future viewing on our YouTube channel. Over the past several years, faculty members and students across our 4 institutions, the University of Minnesota, Howard University, Morehouse College, and Spelman College, have been working together to create spaces for our scholars, students, and communities to be in conversation and work in solidarity. These workshops are an important space where we convene, speak across experience and expertise, cross-disciplinary, institutional, and regional boundaries, and learn together and with our larger audience. Today's workshop, Applying to Graduate School, Advice about Navigating the Process, is deeply connected to the work of our interdisciplinary collaborative efforts and our goals of diversifying graduate admissions at the University of Minnesota and at Howard University. Today's workshop is specifically targeted towards students at any place in their degree program who are considering a graduate degree, and will feature administrators, faculty, and students across our institutions. We'll spend most of our time discussing the graduate programs and graduate student experiences at Howard University and the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. But the advice that we'll share about navigating the graduate application process, as well as the graduate school experience, will be broadly applicable, even if your graduate school destination isn't going to be in Minneapolis or in Washington, D.C. Today's conversation will grapple with the changing landscape of graduate education in light of the pandemic and economic crises. Both of these have transformed the graduate classroom and research opportunities, creating a landscape filled with both increasing uncertainty, as well as the new possibilities afforded in virtual learning spaces. Our panelists will share what has and hasn't changed, and will help you to consider how to navigate these processes as you determine whether a graduate degree is a part of your long or short-term plan. Again, our workshop brings together scholars, students, and administrators to have this conversation with you as you are exploring your graduate educational opportunities. So welcome. We look forward to spending the next 90 minutes with you. On Zoom, the chat is open. We invite you to use that space to share your thoughts and suggestions. The Q&A is also open, and you are welcome to begin sending in questions immediately. This workshop is a little bit different from some of our previous workshops in that we are very interested in getting to your questions as soon as possible so that we can help you as you're thinking through this experience. You can also open up the live transcript if captioning will make this program more accessible and enjoyable. As always, we hope that the bridges we're building between scholars and students and our communities will strengthen the work that's happening across our cities and throughout the nation around racial justice. It's now my honor to introduce our panelists. And I would like to begin by introducing Dean Sylvia McDonald Kaufman, who serves as the Assistant Dean for Graduate Assessment and Evaluation in the Graduate School of Howard University. Dean McDonald Kaufman's work spans across community advocacy and empowerment through faith communities and integrates her breadth of experience in law, energy, and gender policy development and deployment. Her work also focuses on strategic planning, program evaluation, and the assessment of research at HBCUs in terms of their graduate education and outcomes of that education. She completed her JD at Florida State University College of Law, and she is also an alum of the Howard University School of Divinity. Welcome, Dean Sylvia McDonald Kaufman. We're delighted to have you on the panel. I'm also excited to introduce Ms. Stephanie Hall, who is an established public policy analyst who's currently pursuing her PhD in higher education and leadership policy studies at Howard University. Her research focuses on historically Black colleges and universities, and with regard both to advocacy and lobbying practices as means for influencing policy. Currently, Ms. Hall works as a graduate assistant in the President's Office and the Graduate School at Howard University. Welcome, Ms. Hall. I'm also delighted to introduce Dr. Karen Brown, who is the director of the Interdisciplinary Center for the Study of Global Change, a campus-wide center focusing on global social justice and also a unit of the Global Programs and Strategy Alliance at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Brown creates, directs, and teaches in interdisciplinary and global programs and partnerships, including fellowship programs that support graduate students and a master's program in international development practice from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. Dr. Brown holds a PhD in political science and an MA in East Asian Studies, and her research focuses on gender and global policy. Welcome, Dr. Brown. It's also my pleasure to introduce Mr. Derek Manus, the Director of Outreach and Recruitment for the Graduate School Diversity Office at the University of Minnesota. He received his MA in Educational Policy and Administration from the University of Minnesota and has been working with graduate students for over 20 years. Welcome, Mr. Manus. And finally, I'm delighted to introduce T. Ciara. T is currently pursuing a PhD in the Department of Geography at the University of Minnesota and is also a digital propagandist at Wear Your Voice magazine. T studies Black diasporic trap cultures and geographies and spends their time in deep community with Black queer revolutionaries, imagining, creating, and living radical ways to survive the end of this world. They hold a Master's of Interdisciplinary Studies in Urban Studies from Georgia State University, and they're also an alum of Spelman College. Welcome, welcome T. Ciara. And I am Melinda Lindquist. I am delighted to moderate today's panel discussion. And again, for today's workshop, we invite you to share your questions throughout this conversation. You can do so through the chat. You are also welcome to do so through the Q&A box. And let me just see, I was gonna start off with a question about navigating this process, but I will say that we already have two questions that are about GRE tests. And so maybe I'll just start because I definitely, the audience is really the leader today and how this discussion goes. So I'm gonna start with this question about the GREs. One, which is what is the GRE test and how do you take it? And the other one is how relevant will the GRE be post-COVID? So we'll start with that. And then I have a couple of questions, but we're gonna be working really with our audience today. So I open it to our panel in terms of helping the students understand sort of what's the GRE. Maybe you guys can talk about how important that is in terms of your programs and admissions. And if you see or already know that there are going to be changes in the context of the pandemic.
Okay, so I'll be happy to start the conversation then there. First, thank you so very much for convening us today, Dr. Lindquist, and for moderating the panel. And to all who are tuning in, we are so excited about your interest in this topic. The GRE is the standardized examination that graduate schools, particularly schools who participate with the Council of Graduate Schools, requires of its students as a general rule. It is a way of measuring verbal, quantitative, and analytical writing, so that we have some way of having a minimum benchmark, if you will, of proficiency in these areas that are vital to your ability to be effective in almost all graduate programs. It is not the exclusive or the dispositive way in which most graduate programs determine your qualifications, but it does have a way of giving us some window into students that tries to level the playing field. There has been, however, a modification at Howard. The GRE was a requirement, has been a requirement for all students in the graduate school, even if your program does not require it. We need to at least have it on record. But in response to COVID-19, the graduate school has made temporary changes for the 2021-2020 academic year, where we are waiving the requirement for all programs in the graduate school. And we will continue to evaluate our applicants holistically, which means that you will continue to provide your statement of academic interest, your professional goals, letters of recommendation, and an biographical statement that foregrounds your research interest. And we might even request some Zoom interviews. But the GRE requirement is waived by the graduate school. And we send you to our website to look at a particular program to see what the program's request is regarding the GRE. But for this year, this is a marvelous time to apply at Howard if you have a preference to not have to sit for that exam. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So the questions are pouring in. Are there disadvantages to sending in applications at the regular deadline as opposed to early or priority deadlines?
So I can jump in on that one, Melinda. So I think the primary disadvantage that I see for applying for a later deadline is you don't always get full consideration for fellowship awards and other kinds of financial aid. So I always encourage students to try to apply for that earliest deadline so that you have an opportunity to be considered for all of those possible sources of support, whether that's a graduate fellowship or a teaching assistantship or a research assistantship.
Can I just chime in about the GRE? I just want to let students know that at the University of Minnesota, many of our graduate programs have discontinued the GRE, and especially during COVID. But we have many graduate programs that have discontinued it permanently, especially in like the biomedical science programs. So when you're looking at graduate programs, make sure you find out what their GRE requirement is, because you may be surprised that it's not required.
Great. So I have another question. I've received advice to always reach out to faculty from the programs we're applying to. What should we include in that initial email? I don't want to make the email too long, but I also want to include enough that will increase my chances of getting a response. And I don't know if T or if Ms. Hall, if you sent out feelers to faculty as you guys were in the application process. So if you did, we would also love to hear about what you did or did not include in that type of correspondence.
Yeah, so this is T. I'll definitely respond to that one. I sent out email messages to all the professors I was interested in working with, regardless of the programs. When I applied for my master's program at Georgia State University, I was a transfer student as an undergrad for the last 2 semesters at GSU in their policy studies school, their Andrew Young School of Policy Studies. And so instead of reaching out via email directly to professors, I spoke with the professors who were my teachers or classroom instructors at the time. And they sort of gave me a really good lay of the land on who to contact and how to go about the process of applying within the Andrew Young School, both for PhD and master's programs. And then when I came to the University of Minnesota and it was time for me to apply for PhDs, it was actually connections with professors that drove me to apply to the programs that I had selected versus looking at the programs writ large. So I did send out emails that basically included a brief bio, a little bit of my background in community organizing, as well as like previous work that I had done. So I included any relevant fellowships or jobs that I had held. And then I included writing samples, really short, like papers or school assignments that perfectly aligned with what I was trying to do in a PhD program. And then I gave a background on like what I was trying to accomplish in their particular PhD program. Because I didn't just apply in geography, I applied to African American studies and women's gender and sexuality studies programs as well.
And I can add a little more feedback to that. For me, when I decided to apply to Howard, I actually came to an open house for the School of Education. And at the open house was where I expressed my interest of what I thought at the time was my research interest. And so the chair of the department actually connected me with a professor who's now my academic advisor because we shared the same interests. And she ended up inviting me to sit in on one of her classes. And she was at the time teaching an academic governance class. She was like, sit in on my class, see if you like it, see how I teach, see what my research is, and then decide if you want to apply. And so that's what I did. So I actually did that. And then I followed up with her and thanked her for allowing me to sit in her class and saying, okay, I definitely will apply.
I can weigh in on that also, Melinda. I think from the perspective of faculty and programs, I think the other thing that can be helpful when you're approaching prospective programs and faculty members individually is to say something about why you want to work with them. So perhaps you've, like you said, you had a chance to sit in on a class. Perhaps you've read an article of theirs in one of your classes, or you know about their area of research, or you know about their community engagement. So just to say a little, personalize it to what their work is and why you think the connection would make sense.
And then I'd like to build on everything that was said, which I echo 100%. The relationship with the faculty is vital. These probably are going to be lifelong relationships that you will build with these faculties who will mentor you and then nurture you and then hopefully invite you to become their colleague in their guild. You only get one opportunity for a first impression. So that initial outreach, I think, can take many forms, but I really encourage students to consider it as an unsolicited application because you want them to also advocate for you and to carry a very positive, a very favorable impression with you. So I really think linking your interest to their research is significant. And if you cannot find it being their research, why then at least let them know why you sought them out. Because it could be there are colleagues, as Ms. Hall indicated, that are doing the very work that you want to do, and they'll be happy to refer you to them. The last thing, and very briefly I'll add, I want to go back to what Dr. Brown said and really drive home the point that she made earlier. When you do this, they often are engaged in research where they have opportunities to fund students. And so your direct connection with them can lead to also having a portion, if not all, of the cost of your education funded by them in a particular year. So I think it's very important to have that type of outreach that you initiate.
Great. And I feel like this set of answers does help to answer this question about when applying to graduate school, would it be appropriate or effective to mention which professors one would be interested in working with in terms of your research and their research. And so I think the answer here is overwhelmingly, yes, we want to be as specific as possible in our applications. But there is this question that's related, which is, what is the role of an advisor in graduate school? And so I think, again, this is a good question that would be great to hear from both sides, the graduate students side, as well as the teaching and administrative side.
So the primary role of your advisor is to, one, help you navigate the program, but also help you develop your research and stay on track with your research goals and objectives. They also provide you really good connections within your field of study. So currently I'm studying geography, but I'm specifically focused on Black geographies. And the Black Geographies Network is a sort of subfield within the field of geography. And so both when I was applying to graduate programs, and then since I've been connected with my current advisor, Dr. Adam Bledsoe, there's been a lot of sort of community building work within that space to get further opportunities beyond just what I'm doing here at Minnesota. They also help you put together your committee, which is super important for PhD programs and master's programs with master's theses. My master's program didn't require a thesis and a committee format, but they did require that you had two staff members or two professors, oversee your project. And it was a collection of two papers, but I had one professor oversee one paper and then another advisor on the second one. So they're really important at a lot of stages of the graduate school process.
Yeah, I would like to add to that I think the role of the advisor is crucial, as T just noted, but I also think it varies by the area of study. So in the social sciences and the humanities, this is very much the way it works. Your advisor is your mentor and helps you navigate the program and so forth. In a lot of the natural and biological sciences, your funding is also tied specifically to your advisor. So it can be a little bit of a different scenario where you have to connect with a faculty advisor who wants to take you on and fund you in their lab, for example, in the natural sciences and biological sciences. So that advisor role can vary in terms of how connected it is to your support in graduate school, which makes it even more important to really connect with those individual faculty members during the application process.
So two questions. So the first is, if the deadline is December 1st, would professors feel like you were reaching out too late in November? So I guess sort of like, what's the timeline on these types of conversations before application? And then just to let you guys sort of think about what the next question is going to be. The next question is, when applying to graduate school, how detailed do your research goals need to be? The student says, I have a topic and method interests, but I'm not sure about the population or the social media platform. So what is the level of specificity? But so the first question is sort of this timeline in terms of reaching out, and when might be too late and when is sort of like the best time.
So I'll kick it off by saying that the graduate program deadline dates at Howard vary. There are the clinical psychology program, for example, has a December 1st deadline. The counseling psychology has a January 1st deadline, and then there are other programs who will accept applications all the way to April 14th of the following year. So you need to, look at the program admission requirements. You basically have two admissions happening concurrently. One is admission into the graduate school, and then the second is the acceptance of the program, acceptance by the program of your application for admission. Now, in terms of a December 1st deadline, and you're reaching out for all practical purposes, can you believe it's already the 1st of November? It's not too late. We really encourage people to begin thinking about graduate school very, very seriously in their junior year. So it's probably never too early either, but it is not too late to make someone aware that you intend to submit an application. So no, I don't think 30 days out is too late. I honestly don't remember what the second question was.
The second question was about the sort of level of detail that you need to have in terms of your research agenda when you're applying. What do you sort of minimally need to be able to share in your application.
Very fine. I'll kick that off. I'm sure there'll be more conversation on this. I don't know of many programs that expect you to have it all figured out, because part of the educational process is to help you clarify your research interest. You don't understand the full range and breadth of a discipline yet. So it is difficult for 100% of the applicants to be as precise as you must be by the time you present your thesis or dissertation proposal. So that I don't believe there is an expectation that you know coming in the door that this is exactly what it is, but you should have some refinement. So there should not be tremendous angst if you don't think you can be very, very glib with your elevator pitch. But let us know what it is about this field or discipline that is urging you. What is the sense of calling that you have that makes you know that this is where you are supposed to be studying? And the conversations with faculty, even in your current institution as an undergraduate, can help you in clarifying the language and how you present that sense of knowing, that sense of calling, that this is where you are supposed to be, and where you're highly motivated to study. Because we're also looking at motivation and the likelihood of your completion of the program. The selectivity is very high for graduate school. And we want to make certain that we are bringing in a lion's share of persons who have the foundation to succeed and who are motivated to complete graduate study. I now defer to my colleagues.
So I'll add to what Dean McDonald-Kaufman just said. I agree that you aren't expected to have a very specific research plan when you apply to graduate school, but indicating engagement, intellectual curiosity, excitement about the field. Those are the things that really can help to promote your application and make you a successful applicant. I think faculty who are reviewing graduate school applications, they want to see that you're somebody who's going to want to be in their program or their department, going to be excited to work with their faculty. So while you don't need a specific plan, I think having some ideas about where you'd like to go and laying those out in relation to the department and the faculty can really take you a long way on the application process.
I just want to add that you want to show a lot of your drive and your passion to do research. I think that's really important to get across in your application. But I think Dr. Brown and Dean McDonald-Kaufman did a really good job of answering this question.
I'd also like to add to that in my application process, I relied on the faculty mentors that I already had at Georgia State and at other universities to sort of bounce my statement of purpose or my interest statement off of. So they went through and they read it for me. They gave me notes. They gave me constructive feedback. It was really cool to have the professors who had been teaching me and mentoring me through my master's program to weigh in on some of the things that I could have strengthened or spoken to, given the fact that they have been reading my work and watching me develop over the past couple of years. So I would also say, like, do not hesitate to reach out to the network that you already have. Those professors were also instrumental in my application process with connecting me to universities and other professors within their fields that they thought I'd be a good match with, and, you know, sort of facilitating the conversation. It's really cool if you're nervous about reaching out to professors on your own. If you know that there's a professor that you've worked with already that is connected to them, just have them sort of bridge the gap for you. So I'm a really big fan of building community with other scholars, no matter like if you guys differ in, I guess, hierarchy or levels within the work, because you are colleagues and you are all equally contributing, especially once you get to the graduate level.
And I'll add that going back to the advisor role, I came to Howard with an idea of my interest, and my advisor helped me narrow it down and flesh it out to what my research interest was going to be. So part of your advisor role is to help you flush out your research interests and help you figure out what, basically what you can and cannot do, because you don't want a project that's overwhelming that you by yourself cannot do. So part of the role of the advisor is to help you narrow it down and flesh it out.
So this question, the next question is, what would be the best way for a humanities major to decide whether to apply for a PhD program or a master's program? And so maybe it would be great if the graduate students, maybe even like taking a step back even further, going back to a comment that that Dean McDonald Coffin made a moment ago, in terms of really when we're thinking about mentoring undergrads to graduate school, we're also wanting to encourage them to begin thinking about this, you know, early in their undergraduate year. So I wonder too, maybe if the graduate students can tell us a little bit about when graduate school became sort of visible to them, when that happened in their undergraduate career. And then this question about this decision about going directly to a PhD program or going through an MA program. If you guys want to weigh in on that a little bit.
I'll actually start it. For me, I was an undergrad major, biology undergrad major. And so my initial goal was to go to med school. I graduated a year early from undergrad and knew I was not ready to take the MCAT or go to med school. So I started doing research in a lab, a biomedical lab. And basically through talking with colleagues and peers, decided that I was going to get a master's in public health. So it was something that I kind of stumbled upon. But then when I got my second master's in public policy, it was something that I started thinking about, like, how do I take this master's in public health and go further with it? And I wanted to do policy work. So I received a master's in public policy, and then I wanted to add to it with doing policy around higher education. So for me, it was more of what my goals were. And when I started thinking about the goals, like the next stage, that kind of helped me decide on when it was time for me to go to graduate school. I don't think it's ever too early. And I will say I am in the third of the four. We have 4 cohorts of my program at Howard. So my program is still new. So I am in the 3rd cohort. And so for me, I was just excited that there was a PhD program in higher education that focused on minority servant institutions. So it kind of came along at the right time, because if I had thought about it before, there might not have been a program for it.
I would say for me, I had a similar experience. So when I graduated from undergrad, I didn't know if I was quite ready to jump right into graduate school. I also graduated from both undergrad and my master's program in December. So it puts you in sort of a different space when you're not coming out in the spring, thinking about admissions calendars. So when I finished my undergraduate program, I got a degree in economics. And a part of the economics program, I did 2 undergraduate research programs, and I was also a community organizer in Atlanta, working on a number of environmental, racial justice, and queer trans-based sort of justice areas. And so within both the organizing space and within the space that I was in through my undergraduate research, I did my undergraduate research project as a fellow with the Georgia Health Policy Center. And so I didn't really know about the field of public policy until I was doing organizing work and like rubbing elbows with policy folks who were taking the demands of the grassroots and sort of bringing it up to the more legislative or public policy level within cities. So I sort of had 2 overlapping networks in the policy space and decided, after working with them for a while, after maintaining my undergraduate research and then post-undergraduate research fellowship with the policy institution, that a master's program would probably be a good space for me. Once in the Master's of Public Policy program, I decided that I didn't want to be a policy practitioner and that policy wasn't a field that I was interested in contributing to in an academic sense. And so I chose to switch to an interdisciplinary studies master's program in urban studies, which combines geography, environmental science, public policy, and urban planning in a disciplinary sense. And I enjoyed that program a lot. And so in doing that work, that sort of ignited my desire to do more critical theory and critical research work. And so my advisor in that program is a critical geographer, and he sort of introduced me to that field, and I made connections from there and decided to apply for a PhD program from that point. But still, in maintaining the interdisciplinarity of my work, like I said before, I had applied to many different graduate programs across different fields based off of professors that I was really, really interested in working in.
So our next question comes comes from a person writing, as a first generation student with knowing really no people who have gone into a master's program, how important is your performance as an undergraduate student? They continue, I'm a solid B student with a 3.1 GPA, and they have a passion to go into a graduate program. They write, it seems like it's more important to get good letters of recommendation and to show that you're motivated. So it seems like this is a question on a couple of different levels in terms of a first generation students feeling, sort of like fairly distant from some of these programs. There's a question here also about sort of like one's undergraduate transcript, where one needs to be with their GPA. And then this question about the value and importance of letters of recommendation. And then going back to a previous comment that many of you mentioned in terms of like demonstrating motivation in one's application materials. But I'll throw that out to you.
All right, so I'd like to respond to that, because one of the key responsibilities we have in our mission is to provide opportunities, and we work very hard at Howard University to provide opportunities for students not only of high academic performance, and we are known for that, but also high academic potential. And that's really the theme that I'm hearing in that question. I want to say to persons who do not come from families where you are a legacy because your parents and grandparents are alums of colleges. I recognize my personal reality. My grandmother attended college. So I didn't come, I wasn't born into an environment, nor did I come from an environment where completion of college and graduate education was unusual. We didn't talk about it. It was expected because that's what I saw. But there was no one to show my grandmother. So in all families, someone has to start. So I'd like that person to exhale. Someone has to start, and we'll congratulate them for that. Secondly, you should have a very solid undergraduate record that demonstrates that you have the capability to do graduate work. But that, again, we look at that holistically. It is true that overwhelmingly the students we admit have demonstrated themselves largely through academic honors. But that's not the case for 100% of our students. So what can you do then to strengthen your record that convinces our admissions committees that you have A, the capacity, B, capability, and C, motivation, and then D, discipline to be successful in a program? You do not earn C's in graduate school and expect to remain in graduate school. So you've got to start demonstrating a seriousness by taking advantage of academic reinforcement programs and opportunities on the campus where you are. Start blooming where you're planted. If you find that you didn't really think about going to graduate school until later in your undergraduate matriculation, that's not a bad thing. You need to get with a professor where you are and be serious about, okay, where are the areas you need to develop yourself, and what are some of the strategies that you can employ to strengthen then those areas. And now with moving to online education, there are so many no-cost opportunities for academic reinforcement online that many students have more flexibility and accessibility to those tools than you would have in a traditional campus-based settings. Admissions committees look then at your truthfulness with acknowledging that you didn't think about graduate school until later in your undergraduate matriculation, and here are the things that you've done in order to ready yourself. So the more you can demonstrate that you have recognized the resources available to you where you are, that you can take counsel and accept critique and feedback, that's part of the process as well, and that you have acted on it to strengthen your capabilities. That all of that shows that you are someone that's worth a closer look. So because you don't have a 3.5 GPA or above doesn't necessarily mean that you will not be admitted to graduate school, but it might mean that you want to apply to multiple graduate schools. There's a program for you, and an excellent program for you. And if you are not successful in 1 year, apply again. Get the feedback if you're able. And this is where we talked earlier about your outreach to faculty. Get the feedback. It's very important as you're going through graduate education that you are open to feedback, open to critique. No one's trying to hurt you. And you want the feedback. And that feedback, if you will accept it and then act on it, will help strengthen you and really take you, if you are a lump of coal, and make you into a diamond. So that is, if I could use that illustration, is what I would offer.
If I could add to Dean McDonald Kaufman's excellent response, I think there's a couple of very specific things you can do as you're thinking about applying for graduate school, especially if you decide later in your undergraduate career that you want to. Sometimes people haven't thought about who might write their letters of recommendation, and that's something that is very important. So you can think about, is there a professor with whom I've worked or whose class I've taken where I really engaged with the subject matter, did well in the course, connected with that professor? Those are the kinds of relationships that can help you get a good letter of recommendation, because you want to really have good letters of recommendation. You want faculty members who know you and know your work. And so it's important to be thinking about who might be my letter writers for graduate school. And that can be something you can work on, over your last year or even two of undergrad. The second thing I'd mention is that you almost always have an opportunity to write a personal statement for graduate school. And that's a place where you can explain some of your own personal circumstances. Let's say, as the dean said, maybe you decided later to go to graduate school. You can then talk about how well, I wasn't sure of my area of study the first couple of years, but now I found this area, I'm really engaged in it. And you can see that reflected in my, higher GPA in this area, in my connections with faculty in this area. So there are ways that you can put your own undergraduate trajectory in context that makes it more persuasive.
So I have a question, which is, what are the major don'ts when applying to graduate school?
I would say, and I'm not a stickler on time, but definitely applying to graduate school was the thing that made me get serious about calendars and sort of organizing and being mindful of dates. And so going into my final 2 semesters of my master's program, I made it a point to begin to look up programs in the 3 areas that I was primarily interested in. And then I had like a great big list, and it was like, okay, here's the program, here's where it's located, here's the cost of living, here's professors I'm interested in, and also here are the deadlines to apply. And I sort of continued to revisit that sort of list or that document that I made up for myself. And I was strategically reaching out to professors, making sure I paid attention to any changes in their programs, that sort of thing. And then as I got into my final fall semester of my master's program, I graduated that December. And so I made it a goal for myself to try to narrow down the list to about 8 to 10 programs, based off of what I could afford for application fees, because that's a thing. Applying to graduate school, if you don't find waivers or assistance in that standpoint, it can get pretty pricey. And so I did what was feasible for me, worst case scenario, And I began to send out applications or finish completed applications by November. And because I was already in a master's program, I was taking courses with professors that I knew that I wanted to write my letters of recommendation for me. And so I came into class that August and I was like, hey, I'm going to be applying October, November, at latest December. Do you have the capacity to write letters for me? If so, like, when would be a good time to shoot you a reminder? Because most professors will ask you, even if you've taken 3 or 4 classes with the same professor, they're going to ask you, like, can you at least send me a draft of your personal statement? Maybe send me a transcript, because they want to know how to speak to your academic record when they're writing the letter so that you can get the strongest letter from them. So I definitely would say, and it's maybe the geographer in me, but like, I made a map about sort of how I would navigate the graduate school application process. And it really, really helped me calm anxiety and be mindful of just dates and the other people who were helping meet their capacities.
And I'll add to T comment, what you don't want to do is submit an application without someone looking over your application. And I say that to say you don't want to submit a personal or research statement and you haven't checked for errors, you haven't checked for grammatical errors or anything like that. You definitely want to have someone look over your application before you submit it, because while your writing may not be top-notch writing, but it's still, that's what you're judged on for your application, is how you write. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but at least be able to make complete sentences, and somebody who's reading on the outside can understand your passion and your motivation for trying to be in the program.
I also want to interject that you should read the instructions, because every program is going to have different questions. And so make sure you follow the instructions and submit what they're asking. I want to go beyond what they're asking, but follow the directions is going to be really important.
I'm so grateful you said that, brother colleague, because that's certainly what I was going to hone in on. The other thing, I'm going to say, don't continue with an application for graduate school if you don't enjoy writing and reading. To thine own self be true. You will read and you will write. You must read and you must write. And life is too short to commit yourself to drudgery. So if this doesn't turn you on, then I would encourage you to continue to discern where else are you finding joy, because you aren't supposed to be miserable in graduate school.
When I went to my master's degree, I did not realize how much writing and reading I was going to do in graduate school. I never wrote so much in my life. So I really appreciate what you said.
But also, and the last observation I would make would be, T started us out with precision. It's very important that you demonstrate that you read, that you pay attention, and that you can follow directions. The one thing you don't want to do is to start your experience out asking for exceptions, extensions. You don't want to demonstrate that this is going to be real difficult to work with you as a student, and that you're requiring the kind of support that there should be enough maturity and discipline by now that you would. So I want to just be very forthright about that. And then lastly, don't tell us what you think we want to hear to the point that you're not authentic. Bring your whole authentic self with the other guidance that you've been offered, so that you do have some objective feedback, but it's still your voice. So you need to show up in your own truth. Otherwise, I don't believe it will serve you well if you're masking yourself or trying to show up as an imposter. You're showing up as someone that you're not.
I guess I would add, don't be afraid to reach out for help with the graduate school application process. It's a complicated process, and there are resources out there. There are folks like we are in our various offices and capacities They're the department that you're going to apply to. Don't be afraid to reach out there. Many colleges and schools and departments have very helpful information sessions that you can attend to get more information on the process. Don't be afraid to reach out to faculty individually. As we talked about before, you might not get a 100% response rate, but you will get responses from some faculty you might engage with. So I say, I'm saying, make use of those resources that are out there. Also reach out to your colleagues, your friends who may be applying to graduate school, and talk about their experience, particularly if you have friends like Ms. Hall or like T who are in graduate school and can really tell you what the process was like. So I think, there is support and there are resources out there. So don't be afraid to reach out and make use of those.
Thanks, because I think those answers were wonderful. And I think they also helped to answer an earlier question that we had about strategies for tackling the workload for applying for multiple PhDs. So thank you in answering the previous question and then also getting an answer to that question as well. I want to ask this question because it came up in T's response. So there's a question about how does one find out about fee waivers? And I want to add to that a question here that asks, what advice do you have for someone who's interested in pursuing a graduate program, but is worried about financial stability while studying? And then the question is, were you able to find enough fellowships and grants to support yourself financially while immersed in your studies? So it's a question for the graduate students, but I think this is also a good opportunity for us to talk about, finding funding, fellowship funding, and how that whole process of funding one's graduate education works. But maybe we should start with the fee waiver, because before you can get to the fellowship, you have to be able to afford the application process, which can be a very expensive process.
I can talk about the fee waiver program. At the University of Minnesota, the graduate school has a fee waiver program for McNair scholars. There are programs out there, undergraduate program, research programs, where if you're part of these undergraduate summer research programs, you qualify for an application fee grant. So if you're a McNair scholar, and I know Howard, I just Googled Howard McNair scholar, and I noticed there was a website for that as well. But if you're not a McNair scholar, you can always ask the graduate program, do you offer application fee grants? And some programs do. It doesn't, you don't lose anything by asking if they have an application fee grant, but that's how it works at the University of Minnesota.
So at Howard, we have discontinued the fee waivers for McNair scholars into the graduate school. They just haven't been necessary. Secondly, we don't manage the applications internally, but rather all of our applications for graduate school go through a third-party portal, GradCast. And so you go through one of the GradCasts and you pay them directly. So you're not even paying Howard for your application. However, what Mr. Mann has said is on point, and that is after you have applied, we certainly do welcome, and I do encourage you to reach out to the program to see if there is some possibility for credit for that. There can be some reimbursement should you be accepted into the program, but we don't continue that process. Perhaps this is a good segue into finding funding. I would refer everyone to our webpage in the graduate school, and one of the links on the webpage is funding, and there is a funding finder. There's information on graduate assistantships, external funding opportunities, and there is also a program that I may need to come back to speak to. It's completely escaped me, but we're Cost Pivot. There it is, Cost Pivot. And Cost Pivot is something that I recommend because it shows opportunities for funding sources internationally, not just domestically. And we have, and it allows you to set prompts, ticklers, to make you aware of opportunities a little closer to deadlines, when new opportunities are presented that are relevant to keywords that you are able to save in your searches. A cost pivot will trigger that as well. And we train our students in the use of cost pivot and make our applicants aware of that as well. So in addition to funding of some students, and we are very forthright that our funding is not adequate for the number of students who are very deserving. So it becomes very competitive. But cost pivot is one way for a lot of unclaimed money to be identified. And we do encourage you putting together a strategy to see how to get your education funded externally. To the last question as to my personal experience, when I was entering graduate programs right out of my undergraduate experience, I was able to have those funded. I came back mid-career, however, when I chose to come to divinity school, and that was from personal resources.
I can talk about coming from a political background. I always encourage everyone to ask your congressional members. I received a Congressional Black Caucus Education Scholarship this year. So there are federal funds through your congressional districts. There are also in state-supported schools. I know from Maryland and Virginia in the area, if you attend a state-supported school in Maryland or Virginia, your state delegate and your state senators have funding every year that they can offer as well. The amounts vary, but you're open to apply to all of it. So I would definitely find out what district you live in, both local, state, and federal, and see what finances they have available, as well as ask at the school, right? So some of my colleagues in the School of Education have talents outside of education, like they played music. And so they actually this semester have graduate assistantships in the Department of Music, which has helped fund them. So don't just feel like you have to do something in your area. If you have outside talents, there may be something that another department can use as well.
I think also for me on the funding standpoint, I was very fortunate to have at the master's level, I did my master's at Georgia State, which is in Atlanta. And because I was in public policy and then in urban studies, the Andrew Young School, which houses both of those programs, has a very, very big footprint in policy work and urban planning, urban studies work for the city of Atlanta writ large, and a lot of its surrounding metropolitan cities. And so if for students who didn't get funding within their departments, there are a lot of times bridging programs between NGOs, nonprofits, even government institutions. I know a few students who got through their public policy program by having a graduate research assistantship through the governor's office of planning and budget or through the city of Atlanta's Department of City Planning. So if there may be opportunities, like if you live in a place like that, or if you're trying to go to a school in a place like that, to reach out to folks in the community beyond the university to see if they're looking for student help and if they partner with schools from that standpoint. At Minnesota, I do receive the Dove Fellowship, which was something I qualified for. It's a diversity fellowship through the graduate school, school diversity office, which is really cool. And it actually came with the opportunity to participate this summer in the Summer Institute, I got funding to do that for the summer. It is an 8-week program that pretty much bridges you into graduate school. So even though it was virtual and all online, I did spend 2 days out of every week with about, I think it was like 70 to 100 graduate students from all over the country going into various programs. And we all brought something to the table as far as being a student on the margins. So I got to connect with other Black students, Latinx students, other queer trans students. So that was also cool. And those sort of distinct groups then have organizations within the university that connects you to funding opportunities or research opportunities beyond the summer and beyond just the semester. So there are also opportunities once you are already in your programs to find funding and to navigate that field, especially if your initial funding is only for 1 or 2 semesters.
So I have a couple of questions here about, so I have a question that's about deferring and sort of, you know, if one is to, like, is that a good option to consider? I have another question that's about the benefits, the possible benefits, or the possible sort of, you know, like dangers or sort of of taking a year off. So I think maybe I'll put both of these questions out about how does deferral work in the graduate school? And then also, do people think it's a good idea? What are the possible benefits or not of taking some time off between applying to graduate school?
Well, at Howard, students are able to defer their enrollment for a semester up to 1 year without having to reapply. But after 1 year, you would have to reapply. Whether it's a good idea or not, it's not a good idea for you to enter a program if you are not ready. And when I say not ready, if you have family, professional, or other obligations that require time for you to attend to, for you to settle, for you to situate, so that you can give graduate school fuller attention, including the financial wherewithal. So there will be circumstances or situations that arise that will make deferment wise for your particular situation. But in terms of and secondly, a gap year can also provide some persons an opportunity to work and to gain a bit more what I would consider professional and social maturity. Maturation is very important because you're going to have to be responsible for your time and responsible for your program. You really are responsible for your matriculation, particularly in the PhD program and process. And sometimes some persons are advised to take a year and grow up a bit. So depending on what your need and situation is, that can be a good strategy, but it is not one to be entered into lightly. Institutions don't want to have a lot of students deferring. That's not an outcome that we want to report. We need students coming who are very motivated, ready, willing, and able to come in. So I don't think it will hurt you, but you want to be thoughtful about the reason why you are deferring your admission, or I should say requesting it. Yes.
Yeah, I think there are 2 different paths we're talking about here. One is deferring admission. And, as Dean McDonald Kaufman said, there can be good reasons to do that. If you need to do that, you should. But you should always also check to make sure your financial support is deferrable, because that sometimes fellowships, for example, may not be deferrable. They may only be valid in the year that you receive them. So it's really important to check that out, because fellowships, like the fellowships we offer at my center, ICGC Scholar Fellowships, and our support packages we put together with departments, those are not always deferrable. In fact, they generally are not. And so that's a really important thing to check out. The second path I think we're talking about is before you apply, deciding you want to take a year or 2 off between undergraduate and graduate education. And I think there can be some real benefits to that. Again, if you don't feel ready, or if you need some additional preparation in a specific area. Let's say you've decided you want to go to a graduate school in a field you really didn't do much in your undergraduate career. A year off is your chance to take a course or 2, do well in that course, and have that as sort of evidence on your graduate school application of your interest and capacity for that field. It's also a chance to get some experience in a field. Let's say you decide public health is for you, but you haven't done much in public health in your undergraduate career. If you take a year, you have a chance to get an internship, to get a job, to get some experience in the field of public health. So those are ways really that a year or two between undergraduate and graduate school can be used to good purpose to enhance your graduate school application ultimately.
I personally took a semester off between both my undergraduate degree and my master's degree, and then between my master's degree and my PhD program. And I would say the semesters that I took off gave me a lot of time, one, to just like breathe and prepare for all of the things that come with both the application processes, relocation, weighing my options, all of the things. So I definitely think just having some sort of breathing space is cool. And it's definitely good because like most of the time, especially coming out of undergrad, you're really young, like who I was at 22, graduating from undergrad, I'm a totally different person now at 27. So, and all of the things have changed. My research interests, my place in the world, what I want to do with my work, all of the things. And what's happening around us, I'm very sensitive to the fact that, people are thinking about graduate school right now in the midst of a global pandemic, amidst, climate change, amidst global uprisings for, racial and social justice. And a lot of young folks are either directly impacted by those issues, or they are boots on the ground. Like I was a community organizer, literally involved in multiple uprisings in the city of Atlanta, both before I came into this program this past summer and back in 2016 when I was getting ready to start my master's. And so those things, really impact your life. And if those are things that are too stressful to manage, or you don't see yourself using school as a way to work through those problems or contribute to the work that you're already doing, I would encourage that. I'd also say I found value in doing a master's program in between my PhD program to really flesh out what I wanted to do. I started my master's program thinking I was going to work in environmental policy. I thought I was going to be an urban planner. It's sort of like changed every couple of semesters. And those shifts sort of brought me to, hey, I want to do a PhD. No, I don't want to do a PhD in the field that I've already tried out in my master's program, but geography is something that encompasses a lot of my interests, and it gives me a good space to sort of think through all of the things that I've experienced. And so I think it's a really good, it's a good idea to have a balance of the both, to be really into the books and the theory and the sort of social justice work, but to also have work experiences to know what you don't want to do so that you don't choose a program or a course of study that does not at all align with what you're actually passionate about and what you're trying to do with your work.
I wonder if we want to maybe dig into that a little more, because there is this question about that one of our audience members asked about what are the main differences between the undergraduate and the master's degree, and maybe we can extend that to the PhD. So what are the differences? And maybe if you guys want to share a little bit about the day in the life of the master's student or of the PhD student, so people have a sense of how that educational journey sort of changes and is differentiated.
I'll definitely say it's more reading and writing. The more degrees you get and the more you excel, it's more, when you get to the PhD level, it's definitely more reading and writing all the time. Like you're researching, you're studying, you're reading everything from the news articles to scholarly works, you're reading and writing all the time compared to my undergrad. My undergrad experience, as I said, was a biology major. So it wasn't so much reading and writing as it was memorization and working on dead bodies. But now it's more reading and writing. And then I will say this, undergrad classes are, because it's more of a wide variety of things from speech to music to arts. Now you defined your interests, right? And so the classes are pertaining to a particular interest of yours, whether it's education or whether it's urban policy, it's more focused and zoomed in.
I would say I actually started learning how to do the things both as a researcher and as a professional that are vital to what I want to do professionally or like beyond the school setting in my graduate studies. So as an undergrad, I was one of those people who changed their major like literally almost every year, and I was bouncing around a lot, which was really cool because I ended up an interdisciplinary studies scholar. So that was, it worked out in the end. But when I got to my master's program, it was definitely like my master's program wasn't my whole life or like the center of my life at the time. So I was able to, and I wouldn't encourage this because I look back at this and like, how did I do it? But I definitely held multiple jobs, multiple internships. I was super involved in the city of Atlanta. I made a joke one time. I was like, I spent more time at Atlanta City Hall and the Georgia State Capitol than I did in class. But that because I was a public policy student and then an urban studies student, all of that work greatly informed the work that I did in the classroom. So while there was a lot of reading and writing, I did a lot of reading and writing outside of the classroom, just in doing the work. But my master's program gave me like the professional skills necessary to say like, okay, well, I know I need to march down to City Hall and and put together a piece of legislation. Well, I'm taking a politics and policy class that requires we write a piece of legislation as an option for a project. And so they spoke to each other. Or when I took a program evaluation class, I was working at the Georgia Health Policy Center evaluating public health programs. And so I was able to take that into the classroom. And so I would say from a master's level, there's definitely a lot more room to juggle a bunch of different things at once. Whereas my experience in my PhD program, my school is basically all I do. I'm in a brand new city. I get my funding through the school that covers my living expenses pretty well. So I don't have to have a second job. I choose to work for Wear Your Voice, which is nice. And I spend my days, literally, I get up, I have coffee, I walk my dog, and then it's just reading and writing for the rest of the day. I have class like 3 days out of the week. It's on Zoom, it's a couple hours, and then I'm back in my books. But it also leaves time for me to prioritize my mental health and my self-care. I would definitely say no matter what level that you're doing graduate school, you need to develop some sort of outlet routine. I'm a yogi. I became a yoga teacher while I was in my master's program because it was just really good for my sanity. I got a dog, which is pretty cool. So, I mean, I do a lot of different things, and I have community. And so it's prior to COVID, it was really nice to just be able to put things down and go do things with friends, or go, even if it is academic related, to like talk about the ideas with groups of people versus like trying to internalize everything.
So I'd really invite Dr. Brown to, if she wishes to unmute and help me to respond to this perhaps this way. Dr. Brown, as our colleagues were describing a day in the life, I was thinking it's almost like, for me, a funnel, that when we think of, what's the purpose of undergraduate education or baccalaureate experience versus a master's experience versus a doctoral experience. And when I think of a funnel, I'm thinking, and I encourage our listeners to consider this. So the narrow part of the funnel is where I want to start. And that's the way I see the PhD program. You're very focused because your purpose is to create and contribute new knowledge to an existing field of research. You are therefore a thought leader. That's not the purpose of why you go to college out of high school. So the thought leader typically is the community that we are forming to give leadership and to further extend the boundaries of knowledge in the academy. You want to be a professor? We're going to train and form the next generation of professors in a PhD program. You will be an expert on your research question that you present in your dissertation. You'll be the smartest person on the earth on that question because you are the person bringing that new knowledge into life in the world. So if we start then with the tip of that funnel, that's the very narrow, focused expertise that the academy offers into the world. We extend that funnel a little bit midway through the funnel, which means that you've mastered the ability to produce a research question and to hone in a particular discipline on reading, writing and engaging the knowledge in that discipline. You do, and I'm focused not on the professional programs per se, but I'm talking about those what we call research masters. So this is distinctive from the MBA, the Master in Education, and so forth. And it does give you a foundation to continue on to a terminal study in a PhD program, but there is a terminal master's that says that you have developed a mastery of theories and concepts in a particular area, in a particular discipline. You also can teach probably in a community college setting. But you are distinctive in what you do from the thought leadership of a PhD recipient. Your baccalaureate experience is to form you to be able to engage the society, to hone in and refine and strengthen your critical thinking and reasoning. You should be able to distinguish fake news from the truth with a baccalaureate degree in a way that's distinctive from persons who haven't had that kind of experience. You've got exposure in a liberal arts foundation. So you're surveying a broad diversity of subjects and disciplines, all for the purpose of helping you to be able to engage as a global empowered citizen in the world community, if you will, in the global community, and to make those contributions in your local community as an informed and engaged citizen. I'd rather use that language versus talking about the outcomes of all the programs. I think that might be the better way. But Dr. Brown, I'd certainly welcome your contributions in this conversation.
Thank you, Dean McDonald-Kaufman. I think that's a great summary of the distinctions between the various levels of education. And I think something you said was very important when you talked about people in PhD programs as thought leaders. So we've talked a lot about how you're going to be doing a lot of reading and writing in graduate school. You're going to be doing a lot of thinking, right? That's what scholars do. They think, they analyze, they really get deeply into their own context. And as the dean said, you're going to be the foremost expert on your particular topic of your dissertation. And so I think it's really important to think about, does that excite you? You know, if you're in a PhD program, this is the work that you will be doing. It can sometimes seem a little foreign until you get there, but your work will be thinking in large part. And so I think it is important to think about that perspective on the PhD and on becoming a scholar. I think the other point about the distinction with a PhD program that T mentioned earlier is you are becoming a colleague to your professors and to the faculty in the program. And you are emerging into that colleague role throughout the PhD program. And that's another distinction, I think, that occurs when you get to the level of the PhD program.
Thank you. We have 2 questions about letters of recommendation, and then I want to make sure that the third question is actually going to be a question that's about sort of community and creating and finding community, which I think is a good question to just ask in general about how that sort of works in graduate education. But I think in particular in a pandemic, sort of what are the possibilities and challenges of building community in your graduate programs. But before we get to that question, we had 2 that were about letters of recommendation. One is a student saying, what should I do if I have, basically 1 or 2 solid letters of recommendation, but I still need that third one. And then another one of a student saying, what happens when the faculty member that you've solicited a letter of recommendation from gets that letter in, after the deadline? So they're wondering, is there a grace period in this process? If they find themselves in that situation. So the letter of recommendation question, and then I'd love for us to maybe chat a little bit about community building in your graduate experiences.
I can jump in and start the letter recommendation conversation. From the perspective of an admitting program, obviously the letters are key. We talked about holistic admissions earlier, and we want to get to know you as a student, not just from your transcript and not just from perhaps test scores, but from faculty you've worked with. So that's why I encourage you to start now to think about who can I identify to write these letters for me. If you don't have enough faculty letter writers, there can be other options. So perhaps you've done an internship, perhaps you've had a job where an employer or a supervisor has gotten to know you well. Those can also be very valuable letters of recommendation, because while they may not be able to speak to your academic credentials specifically, they can speak to things like motivation and work ethic and drive and curiosity and all of those qualities that are very important in a graduate program. So even if you don't have 3 faculty letters, don't rule yourself out. You could probably get another very good letter from another source. So I think you should pursue some other possibilities. As for deadlines, for many, particularly many financial aid situations, there is not flexibility on the deadline for completing your full application. But I think that also depends on the university and the department. So it's something you can always check and ask if your only missing piece is the letter of recommendation. But for many fellowships and for many financial aid decisions, there is not flexibility beyond the deadline. And I don't know if Mr. Manus or Dean McDonald Kaufman can speak to that from their experience as well.
Thank you. It took me a minute to unmute myself. I want to talk about letters of recommendation very briefly, and I encourage students, and I'm encouraging all prospective students to ask more than 3 people. We're grieving in the graduate school. The dean that brought me in to join his team got his wings and flew away into heaven on Monday morning. He was a beloved administrator. And he is known all over this country as a leader in graduate education. What happens if you ask someone for a reference and they get their wings and go to heaven? I use that language because we're still just deep in our grief. But certainly, I think it's wise for you to ask more than 3 people. And if you are not able to find 3 people, at least 3 people, you really want to ask the question, why is that? What is that? That's communicating something to you. If you have been in college this long and you're not able, you don't know, you don't have a relationship with a faculty member, you want to start to cultivate that now, because that is going to be the way in which you will matriculate through a graduate program and do so effectively. So getting a head start on relationships with faculty, faculty expect it. Almost all of your professors will hold doctorate degrees, which means they know this process cold. And for you to come and make that request will excite them, because that's what we're all looking for is, are you the one? Are you the one? So self-identification, making that professor aware of your interest can also jumpstart a conversation and relationship in your undergraduate setting that could even help identify possible others to write on your behalf. And then I'm so thankful to Dr. Brown for also encouraging letters of recommendation to come from other corners of your lived experience, particularly the workspace. And I might surprise you by saying, even look in your organizations, your sororities, your churches where you do a lot of work, the communities in which you organize, there may be more persons there who are very well suited that you hadn't even considered. We don't waive deadlines.
And can I add too, I just kind of want to put a plug in for summer research programs as well. If you can get yourself involved in a summer research program, you have an ideal candidate for a strong letter of recommendation. And one advice I have for all students is always ask your recommender if you would be a strong, can you write me a strong letter of recommendation? it's really important to ask that question, because if they come back and say, you know what, I don't really know you that well, I can probably give you a mediocre letter of recommendation, maybe you should move on, because I think they just did you a service by telling you that they probably would not be the strongest letter of recommendation. So make sure you ask, could you write a strong letter of recommendation? Because recommendations play a big part in your application.
Great, thank you so much. So I think this is where we're basically at time, but I wanted to, if possible, ask this question, which is it hard to balance relationships and friendships when you enter a graduate program? And I think the other question is, how do you build community when you enter a graduate program?
I mean, for me, so two things. I was already heavily involved in community organizing space, and I chose my master's program in the city that I'm from. And so I was at the time in my life where a lot of the students that I went to undergrad with, a lot of students that I was organizing with, whether they were at Georgia State or at Clark Atlanta or at Emory University or at Georgia Tech, they were all, in sort of the same graduate space. We were studying similar things. And so we made connections just off of already knowing each other. And a lot of us still keep those bonds. I have a lot of group messages with young scholars at various levels that are doing work all over the country now, not just in Atlanta. So that's one way. Also, I mentioned that as I came into Minnesota, I was a part of the Summer Institute program. Within that program, I connected with a lot of Black students and fellow queer students. And we continue to stay in contact, mostly virtually because pandemic, it's a thing. But some of us have the same courses this semester. We've formed our own reading groups. I also say, don't be afraid to reach out via social media. I have a lot of really cool connections of peer scholars that are at or various places in their graduate studies that I'm mutuals with on Twitter and on Instagram and on Facebook. And we have separate groups within that. And we also know how to connect each other to others that are in the same space or similar spaces. So I think community is what you make it, whether it's in your literal immediate bubble or if you're willing to reach out and build community elsewhere. Sorry.
I'll say real quick for me, I've been living in DC almost 10 years, so I was already accustomed to having friends and sorority life and all that. I will say this, my cohort, it's about 7 of us. We're very connected and very tight and look out for each other. While we might not have the same classes this semester, we're in a group meet together where we reach out, are you okay? Or how's it going for you? We check on each other's mental health, make sure we're okay in the middle of the pandemic. And as well as seeing how each other is progressing through the program. As well as, I will say the question you asked about family, my family lives in Louisiana. So it's a balance to not be able to say, I can't talk to you all the time because I have graduate work. And they understand to a degree, but they still want your time. And you have to say, at some point, this will be over and I can talk all day to you. But at this moment, I have this paper due, I have this assignment due. And for the most part, if they're supportive of you, they're going to understand and support you and say, okay, I'll take a step back. So for me, it's been a journey, but it's been good.
I think also, depending on the university where your program is located, will give you a glimpse into the culture. Some universities do a better job in forging of community than others. When you come to Howard, you also get a choice to determine how deeply in community you want to be engaged, but the culture is one of high community building. So you have to work hard to be isolated at Howard. It's typically just not possible. Now, let me sound a bit contradictory. By the time you get into the PhD program, particularly at the level of candidacy, many people are off doing their own thing when it comes to how they conduct their research. It doesn't have to be a lonely experience, but there are going to be some aspects where you have to really live in your data. You have to live in your research And you might not always have opportunities to bounce that off of a large community of friends, but you're still going to be in community, because when it's time for you to start writing, you might, and we have this happening all over our virtual campus, where persons are in community where they write together. They may not be in the same program, but they are students of the graduate school at Howard, and they have set times to write. And so they support each other through the discipline of producing dissertations through writing. And that is pretty common, I think, in across many campuses. We have students in our graduate school who are parts of writing groups that aren't all Howard students, but virtually they connect. We've got students who have participated in writing boot camps out of New Hampshire, et cetera. So, and I think that's pretty exciting. So there are a variety of ways for you to build community, not only on your campus, not only in your program, but with graduate students at large, because so much of your experience is a common experience. And then the last thing I would contribute is you can choose to participate in student governance opportunities. So we have a graduate student council that is very closely knit, but not cliquish. It's multidisciplinary, it's interdisciplinary, and they host many activities for graduate students that are very relevant to graduate student life. And they're not all academic. Many of them are social, many of them are service led. And Ms. Hall certainly did speak to some aspects of that, but they do have some academic support as well, where they schedule time to write together. And the reading and the writing, I keep going back to it, you're going to spend the bulk of your time in graduate school conducting research. And being able to support each other in that, and even being able to have a space to say, this is so hard, to someone that you don't have to explain yourself to, who gets you. You don't need them to have answers, you just need to be able to emote. And then encourage each other, encourage yourself, and keep it moving. So I would say that the family balance, you want to make certain that you are supported appropriately before you embark on this journey. And if you are a parent, one way of helping you to figure that out would be to talk to people who are similarly situated and find out how they're doing it. And if you're interested in those conversations at Howard, there are persons that we can put you into conversation with who'd be very interested in sharing with you how they do it and how they are doing it, particularly in this COVID-19 environment.
I just want to add very briefly to all the wonderful suggestions that have been made already, that sometimes through your funding source, your fellowship source, there can also be a cohort of colleagues there. So for example, PhD students who come in through my center with ICGC Scholar Fellowships also come in a cohort of between 8 and 15 fellows, and they get to know each other and provide a community of scholars who are all interested in global social justice. And I know that's true of other funding programs through our graduate school as well, where there are cohorts of fellows who may share interests with you, and you can really form a community there. And I also just want to say, I'm going to have to sign off to go teach my class. I apologize for stepping out. It's been wonderful to be with you all here, and my contact information is available if anyone has questions and they'd like to be in touch.
Great, thank you so much. And I think this is the perfect moment for me to thank this amazing panel. Thank you so much, Dean McDonald-Kaufman. Thank you so much, Ms. Hall. Thank you so much, T. Thank you so much, Dr. Brown. Thank you so much, Mr. Manus. This has been a really wonderful panel and a really productive conversation. And I will say there's still questions that we didn't get to in the chat. Our panelists have been kind enough to share their contact information with you. If the questions are of a more general nature, please feel free to email icwdemocracy@umn.edu, and we can help you find the appropriate person to help answer your questions about different types of programs that you might be interested in. But thank you all. Thank you, panel, and thank you, audience, for joining us today.
Thank you, Dr. Lindquist, for hosting us, and colleagues. This has been great. And we encourage everyone who's on to reach out to us so that we can continue the conversation when this is over.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.